A front door left unlocked. 3 cars still parked outside like the owners would be right back. 3 purses lined up as if someone set them down carefully. And inside a small home on East Delmar Street in Springfield, Missouri, the kind of ordinary details that should mean everything is fine. Damp washcloths in a bathroom, a dog waiting to be let out, the soft clutter of a lived-in life. But on the morning of June 7, 1992, 3 women were missing from that house: Sherrill Levitt, her 19-year-old daughter Suzie Streeter, and Suzie's 18-year-old friend Stacy McCall. No note, no ransom call, no confirmed sighting, no official answer, even decades later. And the detail that still feels like a punch to the gut is this: investigators believe there may have been a message on the answering machine that mattered. Something strange, something that could have been a clue. But before police ever heard it, it was erased, accidentally, the way answering machines could erase after playback back then, the way small mistakes happen when people are scared and moving too fast. So the central question becomes almost unbearable in its simplicity. What happened in the narrow window of time after 2 teenage girls got home from graduation night, and before the sun fully rose on a Sunday morning in Springfield? Because if you can solve that window, if you can understand how 3 women can vanish from a home without leaving behind the kind of evidence people expect, then you're not just solving a mystery. You're seeing how a case can slip away in the first few hours, and why this one has never let go of the people who lived through it. In this episode, we're going to do something careful and specific. We'll reconstruct what is publicly known about the last night anyone can place Suzie and Stacy alive, the last time anyone spoke to Sherrill, and the moment friends and family realized something was wrong. We'll walk through the scene the way the first people experienced it, before it was recognized as a crime scene at all. And we'll examine the investigative dead ends, the few tantalizing details that do exist, and the theories that have formed in the empty space where answers should be. But more than anything, we're going to treat these 3 women as 3 full lives, not characters in a mystery. Because they were not the Springfield Three to the people who loved them. They were Sherrill, Suzie, Stacy, a mother, a daughter, a best friend, and on a weekend that was supposed to be about beginnings, they disappeared into a question that still hasn't ended. If stories like this are why you're here, the ones that demand patience, empathy, and real attention to detail, consider subscribing now. This channel doesn't rush cases for drama, and we don't treat victims like plot points. We go deep, we separate what's confirmed from what's rumor, and we stay with the questions long enough to earn the right to ask them. To understand why this case still feels impossible, we have to start where it actually began, not in the missing persons posters, not in the speculation, but in the lives that were being lived before everything stopped. Sherrill Levitt was 47 years old. Public records and reporting have described her as petite, a working cosmetologist, and a mother who had carried a lot on her shoulders. People who knew her have said she was the kind of person who could build a life with her hands, working, fixing, renovating, improving. There's a particular kind of pride that comes from making a place your own, from seeing progress in a room you've painted, in a corner you've repaired, in a home that looks a little more like stability than it did the year before. Whatever else was going on in her world, Sherrill had a home on East Delmar Street. She had routines, she had plans, and she had her daughter. Suzie, Suzanne Elizabeth Streeter, was 19. She had just graduated from Kickapoo High School. Graduation is a strange emotional cocktail: relief, excitement, nostalgia, the slightly unreal feeling that your life is about to start and you're not sure where the first step lands. To friends and classmates, Suzie was remembered as social and bright, the kind of person who belonged in a room even when she wasn't trying. She had the kind of youth that makes every plan feel possible. If you've ever been that age, you know the feeling. Your future isn't a single road yet. It's a handful of roads fanning out, and you believe you can choose the best one. Stacy McCall was 18, also a recent graduate, often described as responsible, close to her family, and the kind of friend you trusted. On a weekend like that, the friendship matters. Graduation night isn't just about the ceremony, it's about the late-night laughter, the last loose moment before life spreads people out. Stacy and Suzie were in that moment, the last Saturday night of high school, the first Saturday night of the rest of their lives. There's an important piece of context here that sometimes gets lost because the case becomes a puzzle. In June of 1992, there were no smartphones, no location sharing, no read receipts, no quick be-right-back text. If you missed someone, you called a house phone. If nobody picked up, you waited. If you were really worried, you drove over. And that's exactly what happened, because nothing about this case begins with detectives and crime scene tape. It begins with friends expecting a normal Sunday. The night before the disappearance, Suzie and Stacy did what a lot of graduates did. They went to parties. They moved from place to place in that loose, celebratory way teenagers do when the clock feels like it belongs to them. The last confirmed sightings placed them out late, in the early morning hours of June 7th, and public reporting, along with law enforcement statements, has repeatedly centered on a window after they returned to Sherrill's home. At some point after the celebrations, Suzie and Stacy ended up back at 1717 East Delmar. Two young women coming home late, probably tired, still buzzing with the energy of the night, thinking about sleep, and then the next plan. Some accounts describe talk of a trip to Branson and a day at White Water, something fun, a graduation ritual. The details of exactly who planned what and when vary by source, but the broad shape is the same. The girls intended to keep the weekend going, and the morning was supposed to start with friends. And Sherrill was home. The last known contact with Sherrill is generally described as late on June 6th, when she spoke with someone, an ordinary call, the kind that doesn't feel like a last call when it happens. That detail matters because it anchors her in place and time. It means she wasn't already missing earlier in the evening. It means she was still living her life in the hours before Suzie and Stacy returned. So imagine the house that night, not a crime scene, just a home, a mother, likely asleep or preparing to sleep, a daughter arriving late with her friend, whispering, trying not to wake the house, doing the normal end-of-night things, washing faces, taking off jewelry, setting items down, changing clothes, settling into the soft darkness of a familiar room. These are not dramatic acts, but they are the acts that would later become evidence, because they suggested the night ended normally, right up until it didn't. And this is where the case begins to pull at you. Because if three women were abducted from a home, it forces a handful of uncomfortable questions immediately. Was someone already inside? Did someone knock and get let in? Did someone lure them out? Did someone have a reason to believe they'd comply, or a way to control them quickly? Or did something happen outside, and the house simply became the last place their belongings remained? Those questions are the engine of this mystery. But the tragedy is that the people who might have answered them weren't detectives. They were friends, parents, teenagers, people who were worried, and worried people do what you and I might do. They go to the house. On Sunday morning, June 7th, Suzie and Stacy didn't show up when they were expected. Friends tried calling. No answer. At first, it might have felt like an annoyance. Maybe they slept in. Maybe plans changed. But as minutes turned into hours, the worry sharpened. Two people, friends connected to that circle, went to the house on East Delmar to check. When they arrived, something felt off almost immediately. The front door was unlocked. That alone isn't proof of danger, but it's a disruption in routine. And then there was the porch light. The globe was broken, glass scattered. A small mess, the kind of mess you might assume was an accident. And this is one of those heartbreaking hinge moments in true crime, the moment where, if you could freeze time and tell people what this would become, you would. Because those early visitors did what people do when they see glass on a porch. They cleaned it up. They swept. They tried to make it safe. They didn't know they might be erasing something. More people came. Friends, family. Concern grew and spread through the small network of connections. And at some point, Stacy's mother, Janice McCall, arrived. She walked into the house looking for her daughter and instead found an emptiness that didn't make sense. Accounts described that inside, the women's belongings were still there. Keys, money, jewelry, cigarettes, items that suggest nobody left for long, nobody packed, nobody decided to disappear. 3 vehicles were still at the home. And perhaps most hauntingly, their purses were present, described in multiple reports as placed together, as if set down intentionally rather than scattered in a rush. If you're a parent, you know exactly what that does to your body. It turns worry into certainty. Your child doesn't go far without her purse. A mother doesn't step out for the morning without the items she needs. 3 women don't all leave behind the same categories of personal belongings unless something stopped them. Janice called police. That call is another hinge, because in many missing persons cases, the first hours are everything. Here, by the time police arrived, the home had already been entered by numerous people. Some estimates in reporting suggest anywhere from 10 to 20 individuals were in the house before law enforcement took control. People touched things without realizing. They walked through rooms. They answered or missed phone calls. They existed in the space where evidence might have been. And then there's the answering machine. In the early 90s, an answering machine wasn't a sleek digital inbox. It was often a tape, and when you played messages, the machine could record over them. One message, described later as strange, was played and erased. Police would later say they were very interested in it, that it might have mattered. But it was gone. Here's the first moment I want to hear from you. Based on what we know right now, 3 cars still outside, purses left behind, a quiet house, and the only obvious disruption being a broken porch light. Does it feel more likely to you that this was someone the women would have opened the door for? Or does it feel like a stranger encounter that escalated fast? Drop your initial theory in the comments, even if it's just a gut reaction. We'll circle back after we've laid out the full timeline. Now, when police take over a scene like this, they're trying to answer two questions at once. The first is immediate. Where are the missing people? Are they alive? Are they nearby? Did they leave voluntarily? Do they need help right now? The second question is structural. If a crime occurred, what evidence is left that can identify who did it? In the Springfield Three case, both questions were brutal, because there were no confirmed signs of a struggle inside the home. No clear forced entry. No obvious blood. No overturned furniture that screamed violence. The scene did not match what people imagined when they imagined an abduction. And that mismatch is one reason this case has endured. It violates the story people expect to be true. But the absence of visible chaos doesn't mean nothing happened. It can mean the opposite. It can mean control. It can mean speed. It can mean someone who understood how to keep three people compliant long enough to move them. Or it can mean the confrontation didn't happen inside at all. Investigators began searching. They interviewed friends from the graduation parties, mapped the girls' movements, looked for any sign that Suzie or Stacy had contact with someone new that night. They looked at Sherrill's routines and relationships. They asked the hard questions families always hear and always hate. Was there a reason to run? A reason to hide? A secret life? A conflict? And time kept passing with no answer. What makes this case uniquely difficult is that it's not one missing person, or even two. It's three. That changes the behavioral math. If one young woman disappears, there are scenarios that involve personal choice, impulsive decisions, a spontaneous ride with someone. If two disappear together, it suggests shared plans or shared danger. But three people disappearing from a home suggests a level of coercion or a situation that one person alone could not have created without help, leverage, or luck. And that brings us back to the small details. The broken porch light globe is the one physical irregularity mentioned again and again. It's not definitive evidence of a struggle, but it can suggest a moment of contact near the doorway. Someone arriving, someone leaving, a sudden movement. It can also be meaningless, an accident. But in a case with so little, investigators and the public both tend to grip what they have. The unlocked door is another. Did someone leave it unlocked because they were comfortable? Because they were interrupted? Because someone else used it? The purses, the cars, the dog inside. These details are less about mystery and more about probability. They tell you what didn't happen. Three women didn't calmly decide to vanish with no money, no car, no purse, and no plan anyone could confirm. Public reporting has also described small end-of-night indicators in the house. Makeup removed, jewelry set down, clothing folded. If accurate, that implies the girls made it home and began getting ready for bed. That pushes the question into a narrower lane. Whatever happened likely occurred after they arrived home, not before. The FBI's public-facing material on the case describes a time window between roughly 2:15 a.m. and 7:30 a.m., a span that includes the period after Suzie and Stacy are believed to have returned and before the morning fully moved forward. It's a window large enough for almost anything, but small enough to feel like a trap. Because think about what 2:15 to 7:30 looks like in a neighborhood. It's dark, quiet, people asleep, some cars on the road, but not many. A vehicle pulling up might not draw attention. A door opening might not be heard. A person calling out might not be witnessed. And if someone was careful, if they didn't want to leave behind noise, then the neighborhood could stay asleep while something irreversible unfolded. One of the most unsettling components of this case is that there's no universally accepted moment of crisis. There's no confirmed scream heard. No neighbor who saw three women forced into a vehicle. No security camera. No cell tower record. The disappearance is like a movie cut. One scene ends with graduation excitement. The next begins with a quiet house and missing people. Early investigators explored the usual categories of possibility. They looked at the idea of a stranger abduction. They looked at the possibility that someone targeted Suzie or Stacy, and Sherrill became collateral because she was home. They considered the possibility of someone the women knew, someone who could get close enough without triggering alarm. And they had to consider whether something in Sherrill's adult life could have brought danger to her doorstep. And as in most cases that grow famous, rumors began to bloom. Some were rooted in genuine tips. Some were just stories people told to make the unexplainable feel explainable. In a community, uncertainty is like pressure. It finds the weak point and escapes as narrative. But law enforcement still needed leads. They needed names. They needed anyone whose proximity to the case made sense. In the years that followed, one of the names repeatedly associated with the Springfield Three in public discussion is Robert Craig Cox, a convicted criminal who lived in the area at the time and later made statements about the women. It's important to handle this carefully. Cox has never been charged in connection with the Springfield Three disappearance. Public reporting has described him as a person who drew investigative attention, and he made claims to a reporter and others that the women were dead, yet he refused to provide verifiable details. Investigators have not publicly confirmed his involvement, and his statements, without corroboration, cannot be treated as proof. What matters for the story of this case is not whether Cox did it, because we do not have a conviction or public evidence establishing that. What matters is what his presence in the conversation reveals, how desperate the case became for anything that looked like certainty, because certainty is what families want most. Not the kind that comes from speculation, but the kind that comes from evidence. If you're watching this and you've ever thought, why didn't they just solve it? This is where you begin to understand. You can't solve what you can't see. And in this case, the first hours may have swallowed the best chance at seeing anything clearly. Now let's step back and do something methodical. Let's walk the timeline again, but with the question that investigators would have asked. What's the simplest explanation that fits the physical facts? Fact 1. Suzie and Stacy were out late after graduation and are believed to have returned to the Delmar home in the early morning hours. Fact 2. Sherrill was home that night, and her bed later appeared slept in, suggesting she was present and had gone to bed. Fact 3. By later morning, none of the three could be found, and their belongings strongly suggested they did not leave in a normal way. Fact 4. The home did not show obvious signs of a fight, and the only commonly cited physical irregularity was the broken porch light globe and the unlocked door. Fact 5. The scene was compromised by multiple well-meaning visitors before police arrived. Fact 6. An answering machine message described as strange was erased before police could hear it. Now ask yourself, which of those facts is the most actionable? A broken porch light could be accident or clue. The unlocked door could be routine or clue. The compromised scene is tragedy, but it doesn't point to a person. The erased message, though, that's different, because it is potentially a direct human artifact. A voice, a tone, a background sound, a name, something real. We don't know what it said, that's the point, but we do know police believed it might have mattered. And here's where the case gets complicated in a way that changes how you see everything that comes next. Because even if the message had been preserved, even if it was incriminating, the early contamination still mattered. The home wasn't just a home anymore, it was the last known point where three lives intersected. Every fingerprint, every footprint, every cigarette butt, every smudge on a doorknob became potentially meaningful. But those things were touched, moved, cleaned, and lived around because nobody knew. The Springfield Three case is a lesson in how normal human behavior can collide with investigative reality. Friends go inside because they're worried. A boyfriend sweeps glass because his girlfriend is barefoot. A mother presses play on an answering machine because she's hoping for any sign her child is okay. Those are loving acts. And yet, in the logic of forensic investigation, they can erase the very trail people later beg for. At this point, investigators had to build a case out of interviews, not evidence. They had to lean on the social map, who knew the women, who was near them, who had opportunity. They also had to explore the darker possibility that the abductor didn't need a chaotic struggle, because perhaps the women were made to comply. That idea tends to frighten people, and for good reason. It suggests a kind of power. But power doesn't have to mean a supervillain. Sometimes it's as basic as impersonation, authority, a uniform, a believable story, a threat, a weapon shown but not used, a claim that the police have been called for a noise complaint and everyone needs to step outside, a line that buys you 30 seconds, and 30 seconds can be enough. I'm careful with how we talk about scenarios like this because there's a line between analysis and instruction. We're not here to explain how to commit a crime. We're here to understand what facts imply and why this case resists simple answers. And what the facts imply is that if this was an abduction, it likely involved rapid control and movement, because three people are hard to manage otherwise. Investigators searched for witnesses. They asked neighbors if they saw a vehicle. They asked if anyone heard anything unusual. They asked if anyone saw the girls' cars moving. They followed tips that came in thousands over the years, according to public reporting. They looked at other crimes in the region. They reviewed known offenders. And still, no confirmed sighting. No recovered remains. No closure. Over time, the case became something else too, a cultural phantom. The Springfield Three became shorthand for the kind of mystery that makes you question your own assumptions about safety. The kind that makes people check their locks twice. The kind that makes a city feel haunted by what it cannot explain. But behind that cultural story were families living in a different timeline, one where every day had an unanswered question attached to it. Janice McCall has spoken publicly over the years about the agony of missingness, that limbo where you can't grieve properly because grief implies finality. Public reporting has described how some family members legally declared loved ones dead, while others could not bring themselves to do it. That difference isn't about logic, it's about survival. Because if there's even a 1% chance someone is alive, a parent will hold on to it like oxygen. And that's why the details matter so much. Because details are all anyone has. Now, around this point in the story, it's tempting to start naming suspects, to pick a villain so the mystery feels solvable. But in an unsolved case, that impulse can do harm. People who were never charged get dragged through history. Families get re-traumatized by rumor. Viewers come away with false certainty. So instead, we're going to talk about categories. What kinds of perpetrators would fit what we know, and what kinds would not. A random burglar, for example, is a common early theory in many disappearances. But the scene at Delmar doesn't look like a robbery in progress. The valuables were still there. If the motive was theft, it's hard to reconcile that with 3 missing people and untouched personal items. A random stranger abduction is possible, but it requires that the stranger either got very lucky or had a method that created compliance without noise. It also requires that no one saw or reported the key moment. No vehicle, no shouting, no obvious disturbance. A targeted abduction fits certain elements. If the perpetrator knew who was inside, knew the schedule, knew the girls were out late, knew Sherrill was home, they could choose a time when everyone would be tired and vulnerable. But targeted abductions typically leave behind some evidence of planning, stalking behavior, prior contact, threats, something. In this case, public information has not provided a definitive prelude like that. A known person scenario, someone the women recognized, often fits the no-struggle detail better, because recognition can buy time. If you open a door to someone you know, you don't brace your body the same way you do with a stranger. But that scenario raises its own question. Why would that person choose a moment when 3 people were present? Unless that was part of the plan. And then there's the possibility that the key event didn't begin inside the house at all. What if Suzie and Stacy arrived home and something happened outside, near the driveway, the porch, the street? A broken porch light could fit that. If a confrontation occurred on the porch, it might not leave chaos inside. It could explain why the door was left unlocked. But again, we don't have a witness. What we do have is a case shaped like a vacuum, and vacuums pull in stories. One of the most persistent rumors involves the idea that the women's bodies were hidden under concrete, specifically connected to construction in Springfield, sometimes associated in public discussion with a hospital parking structure. It's the kind of theory that sticks because it offers a physical explanation for why nothing has ever been found. But it's also a theory that illustrates a broader truth. When evidence is absent, imagination becomes persuasive. Law enforcement has, over the years, conducted searches based on tips. Reporting has described locations in and around Missouri being examined. But the public does not have a comprehensive list of everything police have done, and in an active cold case, authorities often don't want to reveal specifics that could compromise future leads. And that's another reason this case lives in mystery. Much of what investigators know, if they know more than the public, can't be shared. Now let's return to the day the women were discovered missing, because there's an overlooked detail that becomes more important the longer you sit with it. It wasn't just that people entered the home. It's that the home continued to function as a normal location before police sealed it. Phones rang. People answered them. In at least some public accounts, prank or obscene calls were reported in the aftermath, complicating what might have been a legitimate clue. When a case becomes public quickly, it attracts noise. People calling for attention, people making sick jokes, people trying to insert themselves. That noise can hide the signal. So investigators were tasked with separating real from fake in a case that began with almost nothing real to hold on to. In the months and years that followed, detectives would have reviewed alibis, travel patterns, known offenders, and tips. They would have asked friends about any uncomfortable interactions at parties. They would have looked at boyfriends, acquaintances, people who hung around the edges. They would have asked the uncomfortable question about whether someone in the inner circle knew more than they said. And that brings us to another name that surfaces in public discussions. Bart Streeter, Suzie's brother. In some reporting, he was briefly suspected in the early stages, as family members sometimes are, simply because investigators must consider everyone. But public reporting has also stated he was cleared. That detail matters because it shows investigators did what they had to do, follow the uncomfortable lines, then let them go when evidence didn't support them. If you're still with me, here's the second comment question, and it's a specific one. Do you think the key mistake in this case was the early contamination of the scene? People coming in, cleaning glass, using the phone, erasing a message? Or do you think this case would have stayed unsolved even if the home had been sealed immediately? I want you to really think about that, because how you answer changes how you interpret every theory. Now we're about to pivot into what I consider the heart of this story, why the Springfield Three sits in that rare category of cold cases that almost feels designed to resist closure. And the reason is this: the case offers no obvious next step. In most investigations, even if the suspect isn't clear, there's a trail. A credit card used, a car spotted, a body found, a witness statement that narrows time and place. Here, there is a hard stop at the Delmar home. The trail does not lead outward. It ends at the threshold. That forces detectives into a posture that feels backward. Instead of building from evidence, they build from probability. They ask, who could do this? Who had opportunity? Who had a reason? Who had the kind of history that makes them capable? And then they try to connect that person to the scene with whatever fragments exist, fragments that may have been wiped away before police arrived. When you think about it like that, you begin to see why certain kinds of suspects became sticky in the public mind. A convicted offender living in the area. Someone who later made ominous statements. A person who seemed to enjoy playing with the mystery. But a cold case can't be solved by vibes. It can only be solved by evidence. Over the years, Cox has been interviewed by media. In at least one interview described in public reporting, he claimed he knew the women were dead, but refused to provide details. This is the kind of statement that feels like a confession to the public and like nothing at all to investigators. Because without verifiable information, without a location, without details only the perpetrator would know, without physical evidence, it is just a statement. It may be manipulation, it may be attention-seeking, it may be truth, but the law doesn't move on May. And if you're wondering why police don't arrest someone like that on principle, the answer is simple. An arrest without evidence is not justice. It's a lawsuit, a failed prosecution, and sometimes a permanent loss of the chance to convict the real perpetrator. There's also another truth about high-profile missing persons cases. People confess falsely. Sometimes for attention. Sometimes because they enjoy control. Sometimes because they want to inject themselves into tragedy. Investigators learn to treat uncorroborated claims with skepticism for that reason. So what does that leave? It leaves the few physical and behavioral facts, and the question of motive. One scenario often discussed is that Suzie or Stacy was the primary target, and Sherrill was taken because she was present and became a witness. Another scenario is that Sherrill was the target, and the girls were taken because they were there. Another is that the crime was opportunistic. Someone encountered the girls and followed them home. But again, without a witness, we cannot choose among these with certainty. We can, however, analyze what fits. If the girls were followed home, the perpetrator would need to know where they lived or be able to track them without being noticed. The neighborhood setting might allow a car to follow at a distance. But it's still a risky plan unless the perpetrator had experience or confidence. If the perpetrator was someone known, the home could have been approached with less resistance. A knock, a familiar voice, I need help, your friend is in trouble. A believable excuse that gets the door opened. This type of scenario can happen fast and leave few visible signs, especially if the perpetrator's goal is to keep the situation quiet. But we don't know. And this is where the story earns its reputation as one of the most frustrating disappearances in American true crime. Because the more you try to solve it, the more you feel the missing pieces as physical absence. Now, I want to pause for one moment and do the one thing that actually helps creators like me bring these stories to more people. If you're finding this case as compelling as I did when I first researched it, a like helps more people discover these stories. Now, let me show you what investigators found next. Here's the shift. At a certain point, investigators had to accept that the case was no longer a find-them-quickly situation. It became a long-term investigation, and long-term investigations change in two ways. First, they rely heavily on tips and community memory. Second, they become vulnerable to myth. The Springfield Three case has generated both. Thousands of tips have been reported over the decades, but a tip is not evidence. A tip is a lead. Many tips are wrong. Some are well-meaning but inaccurate. Some are malicious. Some are mistaken identity. Some are the product of genuine memory that has shifted over time. And then there are the tips that look promising and still go nowhere. Law enforcement has released posters and public requests for information over the years. The FBI has kept the case visible through its VICAP missing persons listing, which includes the time window they believe the women disappeared and a request for information. The city of Springfield has also maintained public information about the case and a standing reward fund in public materials. All of this is the language of a case that is still open, still active in the sense that authorities still want leads, still waiting for the one piece that changes everything. Because cold cases usually don't get solved by brilliance alone. They get solved because someone talks. Someone who has held a secret for years finally breaks. Someone who helped dispose of evidence gets angry and tells. Someone who heard something in 1992 realizes it wasn't meaningless. Someone who has lived with guilt decides they want the burden to end. In the Springfield Three, that someone has not appeared publicly in a way that produces proof. So investigators and families have lived with the secondary torture of possibility. If the women were abducted, where were they taken? If they were harmed, where were they hidden? If someone in the community knows, how have they stayed silent for this long? It's a question that can make you paranoid if you let it. Because Springfield isn't a metropolis. It's a city, but it's also the kind of place where social circles overlap. People know each other through work, school, churches, family, friends. The idea that 3 women could vanish and nobody talks suggests either an outsider who left, or an insider protected by fear, loyalty, or both. Another layer to this case is the way it sits in the early 90s, before the technological shifts that now shape investigations. Today, an abduction from a home might be captured by a neighbor's doorbell camera, by traffic cameras, by phone location data, by digital footprints. In 1992, detectives were working with interviews, physical evidence, and the old-fashioned grind of trying to catch contradictions. And contradictions are where cases often turn. In many crimes, someone lies about where they were, and the lie cracks. Someone claims they didn't know the victim, but a witness places them together. Someone says they never went to the house, but a print proves otherwise. Someone claims they had no motive, but a relationship reveals itself. In this case, we don't have a public contradiction that breaks the story open. So let's talk about the evidence we do have, and what it suggests about the perpetrator's mindset. If a perpetrator abducted 3 women from a home and left behind purses, cars, and personal items, it suggests the motive was not theft. It suggests control was the motive. Control can serve different ends, but it's a different psychological category than burglary. The lack of overt struggle suggests either compliance or speed. Compliance can be achieved through trust or threat. Speed can be achieved through planning or improvisation. In either case, the perpetrator likely wanted to avoid attention. The time window suggests the perpetrator either knew the women's schedule or got lucky. Knowing the schedule could mean prior familiarity with Suzie's home, knowledge that she would be out late, knowledge that Sherrill would be there. Getting lucky could mean stumbling into the right situation at the right time. Neither is comfortable. And then there's the most chilling behavioral fact of all. If the women were moved from the home, they were likely moved quickly and in a way that avoided public view. That implies a vehicle, a location, and enough confidence to believe they wouldn't be stopped. That kind of confidence usually comes from one of 2 places: experience or desperation. Now, when Cox is discussed in relation to this case, it's often because he fits the experience category in the sense that he had a criminal history and later made statements. But again, there is no public evidence tying him conclusively to the Delmar home disappearance, and investigators have not charged him in this case. The fact that his name persists does not equal proof. It equals narrative gravity. The same is true for other names that float around the edges of this case online. Serial killers, drifters, people who committed other crimes in the region. There are always names, but names are not evidence. So what could still solve this? The answer is both frustrating and hopeful. Something small. A memory, a vehicle description, a person who saw a car parked oddly between 2 o'clock and 7 a.m., a neighbor who heard an engine at a weird time, someone who remembers a man acting strangely after that weekend, someone who remembers a comment made years ago at a bar, someone who knows where a weapon was disposed of, someone who knows the location of remains. In a case like this, the break often comes from the least cinematic detail. That's why, even decades later, authorities keep asking for tips. Now, we're going to talk about one of the most emotionally difficult aspects of this case, the family's relationship to hope. When you have a missing person, hope is not a warm feeling. It is a brutal discipline. It means you keep answering the phone. It means you keep showing up to anniversaries. It means you keep re-explaining the story to new detectives, new reporters, new audiences. It means you keep a version of your life suspended, because to let it settle feels like betrayal. Public accounts have described how the families navigated this differently, some legally declaring death, others not. And that's not a disagreement about love. It's about what a person's mind can endure. It's also about what justice means in a case with no body and no suspect. Justice, in this story, starts with truth. Knowing what happened, knowing who did it, knowing where they are. And truth is what has been denied. Now we're approaching the late stage of the timeline, not because the story ends, but because the public record begins to thin. In the initial days, there were parties, calls, witnesses. After that, the story becomes about investigation, searches, interviews, and time. And it becomes about the way a case changes a city. The Springfield Three disappearance has often been described as a case that altered how people in Springfield thought about safety. It became a cautionary tale, about locking doors, about not opening to strangers, about being careful. Those cultural shifts are real, but they also come with a quiet cost. They can reduce the victims to a lesson. So let's return to them again, because they are the reason any of this matters. Sherrill was not a symbol. She was a woman who worked, who built a home, who had relationships, who had a child she cared about. Suzie was not an it girl from a missing poster. She was a teenager on the edge of adulthood. Stacy was not a good kid statistic. She was someone's daughter, someone's friend, someone with her own inner life and future. Whatever happened took those futures away. And it also took away something else, the right to mourn properly, because mourning requires a place to put grief. A grave, a date, a certainty. This case offers none. If you've stayed with me this far, here's the third comment prompt, and it's the hardest one. If you had to choose one detail in this case that feels most likely to be the real clue, the broken porch light, the erased answering machine message, the purses left behind, the unlocked door, or the fact that multiple people entered before police, what would you choose and why? I'm not asking for a guess about who did it. I'm asking what you think matters most. Now let's talk about what's still publicly true today. This case remains open and unsolved. The FBI continues to list it publicly. Local authorities continue to request information. A reward fund has been publicly referenced in connection with information leading to those responsible. But the most honest thing we can say is this: investigators have never publicly identified a person who can be proven responsible in a court of law. That does not mean they have no private suspects. It means the public record has not provided proof. So when people ask, what do you think happened? The ethical answer is to separate probability from certainty. Probability: the women did not vanish voluntarily. Their belongings strongly suggest that. The coordinated absence of 3 people points toward an outside force. An abduction is widely treated in public materials and reporting as the working assumption. Certainty: we do not know who took them, where they went, or what ultimately happened after they left that house. And that uncertainty is why the case is still alive. If you want to understand why this case keeps resurfacing, there's one more psychological layer worth acknowledging. The Springfield Three is a case about a safe place becoming unsafe. People can accept danger in alleyways. People struggle to accept danger in a quiet home at the end of a celebratory night. It hits a deep fear that you can do everything right, you can be home, you can be with others, and still something can happen. That fear is one reason people keep returning to this story. But if we stop there, we miss what the story is actually asking of us. It's asking for attention, because attention is one of the only things the public can give a cold case. Attention keeps it in memory. Attention keeps pressure on institutions. Attention makes it harder for perpetrators to live comfortably inside silence. And attention can reach the one person who knows something. So here's the closing truth, the one that should be said plainly. If someone knows what happened to Sherrill Levitt, Suzie Streeter, and Stacy McCall, the most powerful thing they can do is tell the truth. Not to the internet, not to a podcast comment section, to law enforcement, through official tip lines that can protect anonymity. The FBI has an anonymous tip process. Local police have contact numbers. Those are the channels that can turn a story into a case again. And if you are someone who lived in Springfield then, or knew people who did, consider what you might have dismissed. A strange vehicle, a person acting off, a rumor you heard and laughed away because it sounded too wild. In cold cases, the too wild rumor is sometimes the one built on something real. Before we close, I want to come back one last time to the beginning, because the end of a story like this can't be a neat summary. It has to be a reckoning with what's missing. On a June weekend in 1992, a mother and 2 young women disappeared from a home in Springfield, Missouri. Their cars stayed, their purses stayed, their dogs stayed, the house stayed standing. Life around it kept moving forward. But for the people who loved them, time didn't move the same way. It split into before and after. Before the graduation, before the Sunday morning, before the unlocked door and the broken porch light and the phone that wouldn't ring with the right voice. And then after his 30-plus years of birthdays that don't land right, holidays that don't feel whole, news stories that flare up and fade, tips that go nowhere, hope that hurts. So here's the final comment prompt, and it's the one I hope you answer with care. When you think about this case, what do you want the world to remember most, the mystery or the people? And if it's the people, what do you think is the most respectful way for true crime audiences to keep cases like this alive without turning them into entertainment? Sherrill Levitt was 47. Suzie Streeter was 19. Stacy McCall was 18. 3 ordinary lives in an ordinary home gone. If this case stayed with you, consider subscribing. Not because I want numbers, but because the only way cold cases stay in circulation is if people keep choosing to learn the names, keep choosing to ask the questions, and keep choosing to treat the victims like they mattered, which they did. And if you want another case explored with the same level of care and clarity, I'll have one waiting for you in the next video.